Welcome to the Habits to Goals podcast with Martin Grunberg. It's time to take control of your life. Are you ready to achieve goals faster and more consistently than ever before? You need the habit factor. You're listening to Habits to Goals, the podcast that helps you create the habits that lead to success. I'm your host, Nick Polkuski, and here is Martin Grunberg. Martin, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the podcast.
It's terrific to be here, Nick.
Awesome. So, Martin, what's new in your life?
Well, it's crazy because I think it fits the theme for the show very well. Today, we're going to talk about grit. And the GTR on my end is for about at least a year and a half. We've been working on kind of the next iteration of the app.
Okay.
And it's going to be this portal web sync with the app so you can sync your habits from one app or iOS device to, say, an iPhone to an iPad. Ultimately, since we have an Android app, we're going to get basically so you can sync, of course, from your iOS device to your Android device. And that will be sweet. So I don't want to say we're halfway there. What has recently happened is we've gone live, at least, kind of on the D-Low, where the Pro Cloud version is out. We're going to be gathering feedback, refining it. There's some really cool upcoming features. And so it's been the slow road, and it really fits with this idea of grit that we're going to be talking about. What's new in your world?
For me, well, I'm excited because I have hopefully just accomplished one of my goals for the year, which was to actually find a mastermind group for myself because I haven't really been one.
Good one.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about that. I think it's all coming together. We haven't actually had our first couple of meetings yet, but it's a great group of people. So I'm really excited. And ideally, I think everything should work out perfectly.
Ideally, it will.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind sharing, maybe you can't, but how did you come upon the mastermind? Is it something you initiated, you developed it locally, or?
Nope, it is a local mastermind, but I was actually asked to be a part of it. And so, yeah, it's nice. It's a great group of entrepreneurs, so people with similar backgrounds who are going through some of the same struggles that I'm going through. So it's going to be, I think, a really great group.
Great. And I don't know if I've mentioned this to you. So probably for close to 10 years, I've been a member of EO, or Entrepreneurs Organization. And there's now a group kind of, I don't want to say below it, but it's for non-qualifying companies. EO has certain revenue criteria. So companies that fall under that, they have an accelerator group. And I don't know, for the last half a year or so, I've been mentoring this accelerator group, and it's been a lot of fun. And the reason I bring it up is both of these, EO, you get placed in a forum, hopefully, or you get accepted to one, and it's essentially a mastermind. And mentoring this group is also a mastermind group, so it's a lot of fun. I learn so much every time I come out of these. It's so yesterday I had one, last night, and tomorrow I do the accelerator forum.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is cool.
So I guess, and not to completely derail the topic for today, but any big advice for people who are thinking about or who are in masterminds to actually get the most out of it?
Absolutely. And I think this is something most people are aware of, but it's worth saying. It's kind of stood the test of time. It's Gestalt protocol. It's speaking from experience versus just trying to blast out advice. So hopefully you're familiar with that idea. But when somebody just kind of says, you should do this, or you should do that, or you ought to try this, the person just kind of walks away feeling like an idiot, like, whoa, that wasn't too helpful. Like, maybe it was good advice, maybe it's not, but anybody can give advice. What is really valuable is when a person says, and when you're in this Gestalt protocol, the idea is they're speaking from experience. So the person says, well, when I had that situation with my employee, this is how it went down, and this is what we talked about, and this is what I would have done differently, and this is, so it's far more powerful. And then if you get, I don't know how many people are in your group, but in ours we have 9.
Okay, we'll be about 6.
you got 8 very smart people sharing their experience, and it's not even about your presentation or the coach. It's really about the group dynamic, and the people who are the witnesses get so much value. So it's really powerful. I'd recommend certainly anybody out there to look into either Accelerator or EO in your city.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I'm really excited for it because I think that's going to add so much value. So now that we had our brief little intermission talking about mastermind groups, what is our topic for today?
Something called grit. I made it an acronym in a recent blog post, which I didn't even think I was going to get to, but I'll just say that good riddance, it's over. So this idea that you don't just grind, you're not just resilient, but you're persistent, you're patient. And the more I thought about it, and the more I realized there were probably at least 10 habits that constitute grit. Now I got to back up real quick and tell you why I want to talk about it. So it's been getting a lot of hype for the last couple of years. There's a terrific TED Talk I want to direct readers or listeners to. If they've somehow missed the hype, you can just Google, I think it's Angela Lee Duckworth or Grit TED Talk. And the moral to the story, of course, it'll be much better to hear. It's about a 5 or 6 minute TED presentation. Is she was teaching, I believe she's a doctor in psychology, but back in the day, she was a math teacher, and they were just observing certain traits in students and the ones that would succeed and the ones that wouldn't. And what they realized, Nick, is it wasn't necessarily IQ, even in the case of math, that kind of predicted success or predetermined success. Have you seen the talk?
I think so, but if I have, it's been a while, so it's very fuzzy.
Okay. So it's great. Again, it's 6 minutes. I highly recommend it, but that's the gist. So you take away that what they realized was there kind of is a predictor for success, if you will, and it was this virtue of grit. It was this idea that people would persist and they would want to learn, and they weren't stuck in kind of the static mindset. And near the end of the talk, she references another doctor in psychology. Her name is Carol, I'm just looking, Dweck, I believe.
Yes, correct.
Okay, good. Have you read that book?
I have read that book. It's a really great book.
Cool. So in the grit talk, she ends with, well, parents and teachers and people ask me, so how do I develop grit in my kid? And I'm paraphrasing. And then she says, and I got to be honest, I don't know. And everybody kind of chuckles. And she says, well, the best ideas out there are probably around what is being called a growth mindset. And that then redirects us to Carol Dweck's work, and she actually has a TED Talk, I believe you can find, in this growth mindset. So then it led me to say, Nick, okay, I think we do know. I don't think it's just this big question like, how do you develop grit? So the first thing we know is this, coming from a habit factor background, nobody is born with grit. Nobody is born with discipline. Aristotle, his theory that we're all a blank slate and our experiences shape our character, right? So it's a lot of this nurture versus nature mindset. So if we follow that down the path, then, and we say grit is a virtue, then the question becomes, so how do you develop it? What constitutes grit? And so over the last couple of weeks, with the help of a few others, we put together a grit pyramid, and it's based on this growth mindset. So that's what I want to kind of drill into. Tell me what'd you like about the book, if there's anything that stood out. Because I have not read it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a few years since I've read it too, but it was very, very much kind of what we already talked about here is that there are a couple different mindsets. There is, the growth mindset, and then there's the fixed mindset. I believe that's what she called it, was fixed mindset, something similar. But basically, one viewpoint is that I can always improve. Everything gets better. The other viewpoint is that I have a certain set of skills. This is what I'm good at, and I will always have this certain set of skills, and I can never get a new set of skills or anything like that. So it was a very interesting way of looking at how we go approach learning, how we approach building habits and building skills. I think it very much relates to the habit factor, because people with growth mindsets are going to be those type of people who actually are out there looking to create habits that improve their life.
No, that's perfectly said. And that's exactly what it is. So it's a fixed mindset. And what happens is people will have success. They'll be known. A classic example in my head is, think of that star athlete in high school. And unfortunately, sometimes they never kind of evolved out of that role. It was very fixed. It was like, I'm great now and I will be forever, rather than taking on challenges or adapting to feedback. So the growth mindset says, I may not be good at it yet, but I'm getting better, right? I'm getting better all the time. And so I wanted to drill down and go through these 10 habits, just kind of like top level, talk about what the ones I think that are critical to help develop this growth mindset and ultimately grit. And before I do that, I want to jump back. One other key point around grit, I think, is this idea that people with the grit mindset say, I'm going to go over, under, or through. They're committed to an outcome, and they disregard facts. So, would you say Helen Keller was gritty?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, incredible. I mean, mind-boggling. So blind and deaf, and yet she learned to read and write and get a degree.
Yeah.
I mean, that's personifies grit. Gandhi, the facts are he's in jail, he's one man, he's no match for the British Empire, and yet he manages to orchestrate its downfall and freedom, basically independence for India. Those were the facts, right? Politics aside, Barack Obama is, you got to be gritty to become, the facts are there's never been a black president. And he could look at the facts and have all the excuses, or he could grind, basically. So I think it's that mindset that I'm just going over, under, through, and we're going to find a way.
And Martin, before you jump into, the 10 habits, could you go over just that pyramid, briefly, give us some of the highlights of what the grit pyramid actually looks like? Yeah,
I will. We'll redirect them to a visual. So, but it starts with, at the bottom is this vision. It's intense focus. It's that commitment to a goal. So you got to have the goal. You got to have the vision. You got to know what the end game is. That's the base. And there's nobody ever who's had the growth mindset or grit that hasn't had that. Now, the end goal may have changed, but they start there. So that's one. Second is to be hopeful or believe it's possible. So I think the vision or the goal implies that. In other words, if you have a vision and you have a goal, the implication is you're hopeful and you believe it's possible. Otherwise, you wouldn't have said it in the first place. So these kind of make up the base of the pyramid. And the third is patient. One of the greatest things that came out of Carol Dweck's talk is this, and it fits perfectly with the growth mindset, is this not yet mentality. So it's like, and I think she references a teacher, I don't know if it's France or Sweden, where, and you may have saw this, where they give them a paper and it doesn't say F on it. It just says not yet.
Yeah, I remember
something like that.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't say A, B, or C, unless if it's not an A, it just says not yet. And the idea is if you're not, great at X, it's a not yet situation. So you're patient. So those would be the base three: vision, hopeful, believing it's possible, and you're patient.
Nice. I like that. I think that's great.
And then you move into kind of the middle core, which is great effort, hard work. And those, I believe, take courage. There's a lot of people who talk about taking action and ideas, but when the rubber meets the road, I think great effort and great, hard work takes courage. People, you have to be willing to take that step with no guarantee of success. And a lot of people, of course, are afraid of failure. I think everybody is. But we've also talked about what failure is and isn't. So that's the fourth tier. The fifth one is reframing its mistakes and failures. So we just talked about that. It's this idea that it's just feedback, it's information redirecting you. So in the blog post, the classic one I love to share is, the Post-it note, right? You know the origins of that?
Oh, yes. Yep, I do. I have visited the 3M plant as well. So.
Oh, classic. So for the listener who may not know, the inventor was working hard to develop the most sticky compound, something that would adhere and you couldn't pull apart, like super glue, and instead came up with something that was just merely tacky. So finding ways to kind of reframe the information, you could call that a mistake or a failure, or you can redirect and reframe. Then the next one is creative. Is there a better way? So you take that information and then you're creative. How can you redirect it? And you ask that question, is there a better way? Is there a different way? One of the guys in my mastermind group started a business, and Brian Tracy calls this the corridor principle. And maybe someday we'll have him on the show as a guest. But he started a business going down one path, an entirely different business model. And today, 3-4 years later, it's something that has gone through 3 or 4 iterations, and he's on to something really great right now. So it's just asking, is there a better way? Now that I have information, now that I had courage and hard work, is there a better way? How do I redirect? And then that brings us to resolve and persistence, which all these can, essentially constitute habits. And as we near the top of the pyramid, it's resilience, which is adapting, and then mental toughness. So I put this in the blog post. It's just so funny. My wife is very witty. I said, honey, how would you describe mental toughness? And she said, putting up with your husband.
Nice.
Yeah, no hesitation. And then lastly, it's reflective. It's this idea that you reflect on information and then you redirect all the way back down to the base, and you're back to your goal with intense focus. So it kind of goes full circle. So you got all this information, you're at the top, and then you go full circle, and you climb the pyramid again, you go down to the bottom, you keep going up and down, and that is the essence of grit and the growth mindset. And if anybody doubts this, I think all you do is you identify a superhero, somebody, name somebody you greatly admire. Nick?
Yeah, someone I greatly admire would be, I guess, Richard Branson.
Perfect. I mean, he is ultra gritty. And so did he have a vision? Was he hopeful? Was he patient? Did he have courage? Did he reframe his mistakes? Was he creative? Was he persistent? Was he resilient? Was he mentally tough? And was he reflective? That's a great one. And the answer is yes, 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 10 times, right?
Yeah.
And those are habits that constitute that. Give me another one.
Let's go with Will Smith.
Perfect. The answer is yes. And there's a great YouTube video out. He talks about mental toughness and resilience and outworking people. And that's great. Wow, you're very contemporary.
Yeah, that's took me a second to even think of one right away. But yeah, no, those are, I guess, the first two that came to mind.
Give me one more. Think history.
Think history. Let's go Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, beautiful. You must be a mind reader. Yeah. So he fits. Did he have a vision? Was he hopeful? Was he patient? Was he courageous? Did he work hard? Did he reframe his mistakes? There's right behind me, although I can't read it, it goes through his, he lost the Senate, or he ran for Congress and lost, he ran for president and lost, and he was just so persistent, so resilient. He had a nervous breakdown, and he just kept grinding. And so he fits grit perfectly. So good stuff.
What are some of those habits then that you mentioned about earlier that actually help develop this grit?
Well, those are the characteristics. And so those are the habits you develop. Those are the mindsets. Those are the behaviors. They're either thought habits or behavior habits that you work on to refine. So those are them. And then I think the question is, how can the reader / listener work on these? And that's why I put together this graphic so they can constantly check themselves against it. Do I have a vision, a focus, and a goal? Am I hopeful? Do I believe it's possible? Am I patient, etc.? And identifying it is the first step to developing the characteristic or the habit.
Awesome. So Martin, do you have any other action steps or advice for the listeners in order to help them develop this grit as we kind of wrap up this episode?
No, I mean, the advice is it begins with identification. It begins, and we've talked about it ad infinitum at this point, tracking. So you can use a template, a worksheet, an app to track these behaviors, whether it's courage, whether it's patience. Again, you could even use the virtues app we talked about before, because these are characteristics, character traits, and virtues.
No, that's awesome. So Martin, thank you so much for helping us develop our grit and go out there and be gritty people. And so again, thank you for this episode of the podcast.
Thank you, Nick. This was fun. I hope everybody keeps that at the top of their mind, that grit. And grit is a growth mindset. It's a growth process. And just remember, not yet. So instead of telling yourself, I'm not good at this, just add the not yet. So great. Thank you very much.
And thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Habits to Goals podcast. I'm so excited that you could be here with us as we explore the habit factor and how habits can actually change your life. We'd love to hear what your big takeaways were from this episode. Simply go to thehabitfactor.com/podcast. And you can find all the episodes, all the previous episodes, and the show notes there, as well as all the resources that were mentioned in this episode of the podcast. I also really want to encourage you to go subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or SoundCloud or whatever podcast player you listen to, because we are delivering a brand new episode to you each and every single Monday, and I don't want you to miss a single one. So simply go to thehabitfactor.com/iTunes and leave and subscribe there. We'd also really encourage you, if you enjoy these episodes, the best way to show your appreciation is to simply go leave a review on iTunes, because that helps so many other people find the podcast and realize if this is the podcast for them that could really have an impact in their life, their business, and in just their happiness and wellness. So thank you for tuning into this episode. Remember to go out there and create habits that lead to your success.
If you're looking to grow your business using podcasting, but don't have the time to edit the audio, insert the intro and outro, write up the show notes, post the episode to all the different sites, and do all of the ridiculous back-end work that's required, then you need yourpodcastguru.com, where you bring the content and we take care of the rest. We'll even co-host the show for you. Visit yourpodcastguru.com right now to explode your audience and crush it in the podcasting world.